For those of you who know me, who have been my students or have studied with me in various contexts over the last, I don't know, decade and a half, you'll know that I'm fond of a very particular Talmudic persona. She's a rabbi of the Mishnaic period around the first and second century of the Common Era. I'm a bit of a groupie. He's a kind of my Rebbe, even though we've never met. His name was Meir, Meir, Rabbi Meir to most. He's known for a lot of things, one of which is that he had a kind of pretty remarkable wife named Bruria, kind of a proto-feminist who taught him Torah constantly and taught others Torah and was a real sharp individual in terms of her mind, a real inspirational presence. He was known because of a famous story where he had his Rebbe, his teacher, was known as Elisha ben Abuya, who was another famous Talmudic person who was famous for having become a heretic. And this mayor learned the Torah from this heretic. He's, of course, connected to the school of Rabbi Akiva. But one of the things I loved about Meir and the way that the Talmud talks about this character, Rabbi Meir, whose name means light, Meir, is I fell in love with him when I read a story in the Talmud in Eruvin. Tractate Eruvin is a tractate of Talmudic law that deals with what are called eruv, which means, literally means that which is mixed together, but in the context of the Talmudic law, it has to do with areas that are various areas that can't be, one might not carry from one area to another, and eruv became a kind of dividing line, right? You're allowed to carry from one, individual domain, a private domain, to another private domain, but from the public domain, there's a prohibition of carrying. And so Eruvin is a very deep mathematical tractate that deals with the rabbinic nuances, shall we say, the rabbinic nuances of creating an eruv. The odd thing about an eruv, which delineates space, is that it also means to be mixed. Not only does it mean a delineation, but eruv means that which is mixed together, like evening is erev, a mixing together, or erev rav, mixing. It's in the Talmudic tractate of Eruvin that we find a conversation between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. House of Hillel and the house of Shammai are arguing, and along comes the Talmud and says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These and these are the words of the living God. They're both right. They're both right. It's in the context of that conversation and that tractate that the most famous story of Rabbi Meir, my favorite rabbi, appears, in which Meir is cast as the genius of his generation. And the Talmud says, in what way was he a genius, Gary? What made him a genius? He was a genius because he could tell you that the thing that was impure was pure and provide proof, and the thing that was impure was pure and provide proof. He could take a piece of treif, a piece of pig, and say, no, it's a shtickel gefilte fish, and it's kosher. And he could take a piece of gefilte fish and say, it's a shtickel chazir, it's not kosher, and he could supply proof. And the rabbis say, this ability to undermine our certainties, this ability to subvert our fixities, this capacity to be on every side, as it were, and even kind of make reality conform with his own perspective. This made him the greatest of his generation, but invalidated him, the Talmud says, from being the legal decisor. Nobody ever came to him to ask him what the law was because they couldn't trust. He was too brilliant. And law, halacha, means to walk, and you can't walk if you're not stable. And he was the ultimate destabilizer. His brilliance and his capacity to hold multiple perspectives was such a powerful feature of this person, Meir, that he was considered Gadol Hador, the greatest of the generation. But why didn't we establish a law like him? Because his friends didn't understand his perspective. He was too crazy making. Just tell me what to do, Meir. What do you mean? I can give you 50 reasons this way and 50 reasons that way. Okay, great. Just tell me what to do. Love Meir. I love Meir because I grew up in a family like that. That's why I love Meir. My dad is a lawyer, was a lawyer, is a lawyer, always a lawyer. And my dad, from a very young age, loved to debate me on each and every assertion that I ever made about anything. It got to the point in my life where I remember as a young man, I would say to my dad, it's raining outside. Well, it depends on how you define rain and what's outside. Let's have a conversation about that. My dad always loved, it could be the Libra in him, but we're not going to go there. My dad always loved to make something that was seemingly obvious a little bit less so. He loved to destabilize my own sense of absolute truth, my own sense of, oh, I got it, I know. And for many, 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 many years of my life, I would argue until this day, I love poking holes in my own certainties and the certainties of others. I love to see things from the other side. I love to imagine what it would look like from your perspective. I would love to see and understand and maybe even interrogate your absolute certainty. Because rest assured, almost always where there is absolute certainty, there's a certain danger. I remember that there was a period of my life when I was absolutely certain. I was 18 years old and I had gone to Israel ostensibly for a year just to study Torah a little bit, then to go back to college somewhere. I was going to go, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I was just going to kind of fill up a little bit on Jewish caloric intent. Like I really need to strengthen certain aspects of my Jewish identity. Even though I had grown up in an Orthodox home, I was going off to some school where you never know. I needed to get a little bit more certain of the things that might become uncertain. And so I went to Israel. And of course, what happened in my family is legendary. I came back as an ultra-Orthodox Jew. Whoops. That wasn't what we meant. We just said to get a little bit more religious, but not so religious. I became almost the analog of Goldilocks' porridge, a little bit too religious, not religious enough, just right. I was a little bit too religious. And one of the features of my religiosity, one of the features of my orthodoxy, and this isn't about all Orthodox people, and I'm not, God forbid, don't walk out of this thinking I said this about all orthodoxies, but there was a kind of certainty that I had discovered. I had been saved. I thought about all of the poor people who had not found the truth that I had found. It was so obvious to me. I thought about all of the non-Jews in the world, poor them. They weren't lucky enough to be part of the people that had received Torah. How lucky, Ashreinu, Matov Chelkenu. How lucky are we? Thought about even my own family with their modern orthodoxies, compromises, as I imagine them then, instead of integrations as I see them now. And remember how hard it was to imagine in the height of my certainty that, God forbid, I could be a little bit wrong. And I remember the feeling in my body and in my heart, the sense that it was dangerous to acknowledge that I might not have the 100% certainty that I thought that I had. It was almost as if I were to imagine uncertainty as an attack on my own existential survival. As if in being wrong, part of my mind-body system, the amygdala, the limbic system, my reptilian brain was engaged. Wrong meant death. Wrong meant confusion. Wrong meant now what? I know that when we are threatened, when our beliefs, our certainties, our needs to know what is absolutely true. Tell me what to do, Mayor. Just tell me what to do. Tell me what to believe. Tell me what. In the absence of that assurance, it can be deeply unsettling. Deeply unsettling. And spiritual practice, to some degree, in every shape or form, is to be comfortable with, to some degree, not knowing. And there's shadow to that too. after 4 years of a post-truth world, after 4 years where opinions and stories took the place of facts, it is absolutely true that sometimes people and their opinions and their perspectives are absolutely wrong. It is absolutely the case. And it is also the case that more often than not, we come to our opinions with some pastiche of need, want, desire, fear, hunger, terror. If we were to be honest with ourselves and maybe with our therapists, we almost always know that really, 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 more often than not, we need more information. Or we need to acknowledge that there are multiple perspectives, that there is some truth to some extent, but it's not the total truth. Tomorrow morning, we're going to read about the Parshat called BaMidbar, and it's really perfect because it's the Parshat that invites us into Shavuot. And everything in me wants to tell you that I wanted to talk about truth. Everything in me wants to say that I wanted to talk about BaMidbar, I wanted to talk about Revelation, but it makes me a little bit dishonest. Like most rabbis tonight, there's no doubt that I have to talk about BaMidbar and Revelation in the context of what's happening in Israel and in Palestine. Makes me a little bit angry and sad that on this Shabbat of BaMidbar, on this Shabbat of Shavuot, that commemorating the incredible story of a people who receive revelation in a year with global pandemic, where thousands of our fellow human beings died, that on this Shabbat, I can't just speak about that because truth is on the table. Makes me a little bit sad and angry that on the Shabbat before Shavuot, the holiday that is beginning Sunday night, and BaMidbar tomorrow, we can't just talk about the culmination of a 7-week journey to receive our new marching orders into the new world that is being born. As we begin to open up and back into the world, it makes me sad and angry. And it isn't altogether true that as a rabbi, standing before all of you, even a rabbi who's been around for 15 years and who started his own community, that I don't also stand here like almost every colleague I know in the pulpit with the unenviable task of trying to say something that you've never heard before, to give you some truth that you'll say, oh, now I know, or to tell you just enough for those who want me as a rabbi or others as rabbis to say, you know, I stand with Israel no matter what. Just so the others can say, you stand with Israel no matter what, so that we can begin to fight about it. And the left can fight with the right, and the right can fight with the left, and we could say, I can't believe Rome was a place where they X. I'm going to another shul. I want to go find the porridge that's just right. Can hear it. It's everywhere. I remember being in the land of Israel, being a fellow at the Hartman Institute in 2014. Many of you remember that summer, right? That summer, the last time this kind of conflagration took place, right? That summer where Ayal and Gilad and Naphtali, aleihem hashalom, were kidnapped. And where each and every day, instead of tracking the pandemic the way we've been this year, we were tracking the hope and the despair of mothers waiting to find out if their 3 children, if their boys had been killed. I was there that summer. I was there with the blaming and the finger pointing. And I was there also when Jewish vigilantes took the life of Muhammad Abu Kidder, and I was in the mourning tent of the father of that child who was murdered. And I remember the finger pointing, and I remember the blaming, and I remember the hand wringing, and I remember it all. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember sitting in a bomb shelter with my own wife and my own kids and asking myself, how far does my liberalism go? How far does my humanitarianism go? My belief in the goodness of all, as I wondered if a bomb would land on me right there in that house that summer, wondering if I would get to see my children marry. Does anybody have the answer that will satisfy our need for certainty? Does anybody have the perfect analysis? Is it AJC or UJA or any of the other acronyms? Can anybody be right enough or left enough? To my friends on the left, wake up. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They're lobbing rockets and threatening to murder civilians randomly all over the country. Is there a deeper context? Of course, but they're a terrorist organization. And to my friends on the right, really? People like Rabbi Daniel Gordis already today talking about 20% of Israel's population are Israeli Arabs, and the larger context for these riots, of course. Is Israel a beacon to the world? Of course it is. Does it have huge problems? Of course it does. Does Israel have a right to defend itself? It does. How many truths can we hold before we're torn apart? I had a student named Rebecca Schisler who wrote this on her Facebook page that I wanted to share with you. She lives in Jerusalem right now. She wrote, "I love this holy land. My heart breaks for her." To my friends, she says, who like to reduce this conflict to a soundbite, and to my friends who say things like European colonialist and imperialist powers, who tell the story of Israel in simple and simplified reductionist perspectives. Let me say this. State-sanctioned violence is immoral and abhorrent, and Jews belong here. She says, our unwillingness to question our own stories and engage the other has got to stop. She said, I've seen the phrase both-andism floating around, which I assume has to do with chalking everything up to moral relativity and thus condoning violence. And what I'm advocating for is actually the opposite. I am advocating, she writes, for the pursuit of truth through engaging those with different views in order to understand them more and their reality and to see their humanity. I spoke to a rabbi today. I will not say his name. He's a rabbi for a very, very, very large modern Orthodox community. And we spoke about the threading of the needle that is required at this moment, the things that rabbis say behind closed doors. I shared with him how in the community that I am in and in the broader communities of liberal Jewish communities, how often we're caught between being called too humanistic, too universalistic, too sympathetic to the other, not sufficiently grounded in our Jewishness and our Jewish pride and our Jewish identity. And how he then shared with me, and in my communities, he says, if I even show sympathy, it's weakness. If I even speak about the other, I am in danger. In danger. I remember the look on that Palestinian boy's father as a group of rabbis from America, shuffled past, paying our respects. I remember the look on his face and what he said. He said, my heart cries for all of the children. So I invite all of us on this Shabbat before Revelation. On the Shabbat where the Torah tells us, the rabbis tell us that each and every person who stood at Sinai heard the Torah uniquely for them, their own Torah, their own truth. The Torah appeared with all 70 faces, as it were, 70 perspectives. To be able to notice the part of us that wants to make it simple. The part of us that wants to blame and to find out who started. Notice that. And then for a moment, back away. Back away. I can already hear various voices in the community sending me emails tonight, tomorrow. So before I close, I wanted to tell you a story that some of you might remember, but let me say once again, the attacks on the right of our people to have a homeland, the extreme vitriol towards the Jewish state is something that I personally can't abide. But what I can abide is being able to sit together in an honest way to talk about what peace might look like once we acknowledge that no one is going to win this. There's no winning. No one's going to win. No one's going to win. And when groups like Hamas and other groups who are ethno-nationalist or ethno-racist, when we say no to those voices of hatred, and we say yes to multiple perspectives on truth and multiple abilities to listen to one another, that's the way forward. I was walking in the old city of Yerushalayim a year before in 2013, and it was the day of Jerusalem, and it was, of course, the day that, right, there's tremendous tension on that day. It's the day of where Jews commemorate the retaking of the old city and the unification of Yerushalayim, or at least the story of Jerusalem and our home, our relationship with Yerushalayim, our relationship with the holy city. And I remember running. I was running with a friend of mine. We were trying to make it to the Kotel, to the wall, the western wall. And we were running. There was no way to get in through one entrance, and so we went around the back. And we were walking through the Arab Quarter, walking through the Shuk. And we ducked down one small little pathway. And they started the ceremony, the tekes began, and I couldn't get in. And so I was standing like 20 feet behind all of them. They were all the people were standing on little boxes, and they were looking over to see, they could see what was happening inside the old city. And I was sitting back a little bit, just taking in all of the people. And as I was leaning on a wall behind me, the door next to me began to open up, and I saw like a little person begin to walk out. Like there's this little form like this looking around. And then the most remarkable thing happened. This young Palestinian boy must have been around my son Or's age, about 5 years old. He came out wearing like a little soccer shirt with a number 10 on it. And then there was like a little boy that looked like he was a settler boy with long side locks and a big knitted yarmulke. And they looked at each other. And they held each other's gaze for what felt to me like infinity. And then each father grabbed the kid and pulled him to his side. And they went their way. And I was left with an image that I'll never forget of a world where truth and certainty, although important, give way to that place in the middle where the children meet, in the back streets, behind the ceremonies and the slogans. That's what I pray for every day. So tonight, as we make our way towards Sinai and towards tomorrow's reading of the Book of Wilderness, let's pray for those children. Let's pray with all of our hearts and all of the hope that we can muster for a world where there's a little bit less truth, maybe, and a lot more love. I invite you to please rise for Olam Chesed Yibaneh.